Signs God is protecting you from what you can't see. There are seasons in life when nothing feels wrong, but something still doesn't feel right. You go to work, you talk to people, you pray when you remember. From the outside, everything looks normal. But deep inside, there's a quiet tension you can't explain. You keep thinking, why did that opportunity disappear? Why did that relationship end before it even began? Why did God stop something I was sure was meant for me? What if the unanswered prayers weren't silence? What if the delays weren't mistakes? What if God has been protecting you? Not from what you fear, but from what you never saw coming. When something is taken away before it fully begins, the mind immediately fills the gap with imagination. You picture how good it could have been and how different life might look now. Because nothing visibly went wrong, you assume the loss itself was the problem. You replay conversations, decisions, and timing, wondering what you should have done differently. But what you couldn't see was the full picture forming beyond that moment. You couldn't see the stress that would have followed, the compromises that would have slowly changed you, or the weight that success or attachment would have placed on your spirit. God's protection often works quietly, removing things before they demand more from you than you are ready to give. Not because you are weak, but because growth requires timing, not just desire. What feels like loss in the present is sometimes distance created for your future self. Distance from harm you couldn't recognize and outcomes you weren't prepared to survive. There are times when God protects you not by building walls, but by closing doors so quietly that you question whether they were ever open at all. Nothing dramatic happens. No clear warning. Just a slow fading of momentum that leaves you confused instead of alarmed. That confusion is often the hardest part because the human mind wants clarity. It wants a reason it can explain to others. When none appears, doubt steps in and whispers that you missed your chance or failed to act fast enough. But protection does not always announce itself as danger avoided. Sometimes it shows up as discomfort that doesn't make sense yet. A restlessness that keeps you from settling where you thought you belonged. You might wonder why peace never arrived even when everything looked right on paper. Why your spirit resisted places and people that seemed good for your life. That resistance is not rebellion. It is awareness forming beneath the surface. God often allows you to feel uneasy before harm ever becomes visible. That unease is not meant to scare you. It is meant to slow you down long enough for protection to do its work without forcing your hand. Later, when you finally see what was coming, you realize the delay was not punishment. It was mercy moving ahead of you, quietly redirecting your path before you walked too far to turn back. There is a kind of protection that only becomes visible in hindsight, long after the disappointment has settled into memory and stopped hurting. At the time, you only felt the loss. You didn't know that something unseen was already being kept from shaping your life in the wrong direction. What you were spared from may not have looked dangerous on the surface. It may have looked promising, exciting, or even God-sent. But not everything that looks good leads to a good ending. Some paths don't break you suddenly. They wear you down slowly. They reshape your values, shift your priorities, and pull you away from who you were becoming without ever announcing that damage is happening. God's protection often works on the level of identity, not just safety. He guards the person you are becoming, not just the situation you are walking into. You were not being kept from success. You were being kept from success that would cost you your peace. You were not being denied love. You were being spared attachment that would hollow you out over time. What felt like a closed door was actually a narrowing of the path, protecting you from drifting into a version of life that looked full but would have left you empty. There comes a moment when clarity doesn't arrive as a sudden revelation, but as a quiet understanding that settles in without noise. You don't hear a voice. You don't receive a sign. You simply begin to notice how much lighter your life feels compared to the weight you almost carried. You realize that the anxiety you thought was normal is gone. The pressure you accepted as part of growth never returned. And only then do you understand that what was removed was never meant to stay. Protection often reveals itself through absence. The absence of chaos. The absence of constant striving. The absence of having to become someone you didn't recognize just to keep something alive. You start to see that God didn't interrupt your life to limit you. He intervened to preserve you. Not every closed door was about timing. Some were about survival of the soul. When you stop forcing what refuses to grow, you give room for what was always meant to rise naturally. Peace is not found in holding tighter. It's found in learning when to release. And in that release, you begin to trust that God's silence was not distance. It was guidance without pressure, shaping your path gently instead of pushing you painfully. Eventually, you stop asking why certain things never worked out, and you start noticing who you became because they didn't. The patience you learned, the discernment that sharpened, the strength that formed quietly when no one was watching. You realize that God was not just protecting you from events, but from versions of yourself that would have emerged under the wrong pressure. Some outcomes would have required you to live rushed, disconnected, or constantly proving your worth. What didn't happen saved you from a life that looked successful but felt empty. What fell apart kept you from carrying burdens that would have slowly eroded your peace, your integrity, and your ability to rest. Protection doesn't always feel kind when it arrives, but it is almost always gentle in its intention. God never rushes you into something that will cost you your soul just to give you what you want. If you are in a season where something ended without explanation, this may be the sign you were asking for. Not that you failed, not that you missed your chance, but that you were spared from what you couldn't yet see. If this resonates with you, share in the comments what you believe God might have been protecting you from, even if you only understand it now. Your story may be exactly what someone else needs to read today.